Hello, everyone. It's Lionel Sandner from Pembroke Publishers, and thanks for joining us today. It's great to have you join us for our session with three speakers, and I'm looking forward to hearing from all three of them and spending a little bit of time chatting with them after. Just before we get started, though, I would like everyone to know that Pembroke Publishers' head office is situated upon traditional territories of the Wendat, the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of Scugog, Hiawatha First Nation, Alderville First Nation, and the Métis Nation, and that the treaty covering this area of land in Toronto, Ontario, is collectively known as the Williams Treaties of 1923. I would also like to acknowledge and thank the Wasanich people on whose traditional territories I live, work, and learn. The Wasanich people have lived and worked on this land since time immemorial. I wish to recognize the significant contributions of Indigenous peoples across this land. We seek a new relationship with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, one based in honor and deep respect. And just before I introduce our first speaker for today, just a reminder that if you have any questions during any part of the presentations, just drop your question into the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat and we'll be very happy to bring those questions forward in kind of a short Q&A session after each of the three presenters give their 15 to 20 minutes or so. If you have any things you would like to tweet out because you're a Twitter type person, we have the hashtag Pembroke Webinars. Please feel free to do that, and our stream will catch that, and we'd really appreciate you letting us know what you're thinking of the session and if something speaks to you. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. On my screen, she's kind of off to my right, but depending on how your browser interprets where to put us, you'll see beside me Dr. Jennifer Rowsell. Jennifer is currently Professor of Literacies and Social Innovation at the University of Bristol. She teaches, writes, and researches in a wide range of areas around literacy, including multimodal, makerspace, and arts-based research with young people, digital literacy research with children, and digital divide work in international contexts. So I expect given the last year, she's been pretty busy given all of us being pushed and moved and cajoled and required to move into a more sort of online digital landscape within our teaching. I think having you here, Jennifer, is timely and very, very nice. I should also mention that Jennifer has taught internationally. That includes here in Canada, as well as the United States, Australia, and currently in the United Kingdom. After when I first met her, I realized that I have been to Bristol, where you were calling home right now, as we traveled over to Wales and visited relatives. So it was a good flashback to a good memory of a good holiday, something that I think we are all looking forward to here in the new future. So Jennifer, welcome. It's great to have you here. I'll pass the virtual mic over to you and we'll get started.
Okay, thank you so much, Lionel. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank Mary Machuzi, who's invited me kindly, and also one of my best friends, Larry Swartz, who you're probably here for Larry, actually, and Terry. But I am delighted to be here and to do something Canadian, because I'm feeling very UK these days. So when Mary tasked me with the talk, I said, what can I possibly talk about? And she said, what about sparking joy for online learning? And I'm actually really passionate about online learning. You're probably all a bit fed up with it at this point, but I think we certainly can take stock over the pandemic about what's gone well, what has not gone well, what drives us crazy, what we like about it. So I'm hoping that this will be like a Marie Kondo kind of talk where we think about ways that we can spark joy with online teaching. So I'm going to begin with a quote I always do with something, and it's Alan Turing, which is fitting given that he invented the computer. And we can only see a short distance ahead, but we can see plenty there needs to be done. And I like this quote because I think that we've learned a lot over this past year, but I think it's probably just the tip of the iceberg as far as what we need to know about things like I work in literacy or research in literacy. How do we reimagine reading? How do we think about writing? How do we also just get out of the digital in in a healthy way. So there are lots of things that we don't know what lies ahead, and we're still really in the midst of the pandemic, really. So what I want to do for a couple of minutes, and I'm really going to keep my time short for the other speakers. So I want to think about what have children and teenagers and adolescents been doing. So I've spent a lot of time this year researching online the sorts of things that young people want to do. Okay, so and what they've done and what they can really only do these days is largely in home spaces. Now, obviously, there are digital divide issues and not everyone has equal access to technology, but a lot of the stuff has had to do with being online. So they've created TikTok videos and they've created photographs and they've had lots of Zoom calls like many of you. And they've also done analog things like produced a lot of art. So I have the picture of a rainbow there, and that's in the UK. There were lots of rainbows to honor the NHS. Okay, so rainbows in windows, teddy bears in windows, people clapping for the NHS, which is the National Health Service here in the United Kingdom. Similar rituals happened all around the world where we wanted to honor healthcare frontline workers. All right, so children and teenagers got involved in that. And one of the reasons I want to flag this is where our logic needs to be. This is where our sparks need to be, is to really look at the fun stuff that they have created and get inspiration from that and really develop curriculum and teaching from that. So they've been, as I said, sharing TikTok videos. So if you go onto TikTok, you'll see endless videos about a variety of things. I was very interested in their videos about coronavirus and COVID-19 and how many cool, interesting facts they had about viruses, but specifically COVID-19 and vaccines. They've been very involved, as always, with gaming spaces and digital cultures. So we might have people right now in the virtual room who are really keen on embedding gaming logic into your teaching, and I'd love to hear about that. So during the pandemic, there have been teachers who have really mobilized gaming spaces in order to teach math or science or literacy, teaching scientific principles through Minecraft, okay? There have been a lot of teenagers who've turned to activism. So I've done research about social media and young people and activism. And this year has been about the pandemic, but it's also been about tremendous changes that have happened this year, like Black Lives Matter, and like things that have to be in nature, that have to do with nature, sustainability. So teens have turned to Twitter, okay? But the other interesting thing is that when we think that everything is digital, there's been a pushback, and there's been an embracing of things like poetry and journaling and books and painting and walking and listening to records. So there has been a turn by young people to analog and digital spaces. So I think as teachers, we need to remember that we don't sort of throw away the really, I don't know, we think of them as traditional nowadays because we're online all the time. So ways to spark joy. So that's my purpose. That's what I've been tasked with. So making teaching obviously inquiry-based. It's sort of the key, I think, to a lot of this online learning and self-directed. But the only caveat I have is that it can't be entirely self-directed because what we've seen also is that students shut off a bit with online spaces. So it's sort of the balance of being there and sparking curiosity, but at the same time having a presence so that you're always aware of what your different learners are doing. Okay, so some of that might be media production activities like producing TikTok videos. Or individual learning projects that you have them go off, work on for a little bit, and then come back again. Probably many of you already do this. Problem-solving teaching works well in particularly STEM areas. So one of the activities that I talked about with a colleague is finding bizarre scientific questions that teachers can encourage them to investigate and curate information. So one of the things that I've noticed doing research with digital readers is digital readers are voracious gatherers of information, right? And have them find those kind of facts. You can also think of clusters of skills. So finding information on websites and then looking at TED Talks and YouTube videos and podcasts and curating them and presenting them. But I think the important piece here is that critical framing, is the role of the teacher is not invisible. It's very visible. How do you actually assess a good TED Talk? That's a skill, okay? How do you actually craft a podcast that you want to listen to, that is compelling, that has a script? So these are skills that students need to hone and learn. And you spark joy by feeding into those interests, but you also have the hook in there and the motivational carrot on a stick for them to continue with that. And then reflective blogging, but I think the thing is, we hear a lot about blogging, but it's actually maybe blogging online with them and teaching them about the craft of language and crafting a really good blog and what that means. So some of the things that have remained the same during the pandemic that I've noticed is that we still need to community build online in our classes, right? When we're teaching online, we still need to have a sense of community. We can't lose people online. There's still choice and differentiation. We still have to offer options, right? And differentiate different learners. And that's tricky in an online forum. I don't think I've mastered it in my teaching this year. And then we still have to scaffold, and we still have to model, and we still have to have goal-driven teaching, right? And I think the final thing is that we have to exhibit passion and curiosity. Even when we're exhausted and fed up with online teaching, we still have to have that kind of passion that's there. And there's a DIY feel to sparking joy with online teaching. And what I mean by that is a do-it-yourself. So think about shorter chunks of time online. So a lesson that might have taken 20 minutes before a workshop, you want to whittle that down to about 7 minutes and have much shorter targeted kinds of instruction. And then after that, you build off it with a task. And you want sort of platforms for information sharing. Now, I talked about some, probably people in the room have others. YouTube, TED Talk, Khan Academy, Vimeo. These are ones that I've used quite a bit in the kinds of teaching that I've done. And then all the interactive ones, Padlet, Blogger, iMovie, Instagram, TikTok, Flipgrid. Now, I sound like I'm tech savvy when I'm not. I'm not like a Lionel. But I know of them, and I know their worth. So I find I have a couple of them that I like to use a lot. And the big thing is that you want to, again, exhibit that passion. That's what it's about. And that hasn't gone away. And platforms for storytelling. So kids love stories. And I'm working on a project called We Are Our Stories. And it's about what stories have happened for kids during lockdown. And stories can be a really simple way of being compelling, of having a compelling way of teaching. And you can use it through Storybird, iBook, and Animoto, but you can also just very simply have them create a storybook about a COVID story. With online teaching, as I said, there's a rhythm and structure, and that is, again, many of you will know this, announcing what the topic is, and then maybe navigating an online text together collectively, and then direct teaching. And that's where you have to step in and swoop in as teachers and give a targeted workshop about something, right? Topic sentence, let's say. And then you have a DIY productive work that they do always to build onto that. Now, of course, I would say multimodal. And by multimodal, I mean not just words, but also words and images and sounds, so that has a dynamism of an online platform. And then reflections that are student-driven. So thinking about it. I'm going to kind of speed ahead a bit because I realize the time's going quickly. This is something I worked on with a colleague back in 2016, and this was a way of assessing student work online. So is it productive? Meaning, does it go across a few platforms? Is it open-ended? Is it connected to other texts? And is it multimodal? And ticking those boxes, yes, 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 it has those components. And in what ways does it not? Was a way for us to assess how children used apps, for example. Now, I wanted to give an example because my friend Larry's in the room, and I don't know whether I think he has seen this, but we did a really interesting research study with kids in St. Catharines, Ontario. And really what they did was they created flip books, and from flip books, they created a short movie. So this is something you could do online over a few days. There's no reason why you can't have them create flip books and have them work in a moving image. Now, Lionel, you might want to show this one. I don't know how you'll do it, but this was a little video that one of the students made about a pencil. It was just, and this was very simple. It was a set of Post-it notes that they had little tiny changes each one, and they made into a movie. I flagged that because that is something to think about doing with kids. And they loved the Post-it note activity. I never haven't seen the kids so animated when they were doing it. So I thought about for this talk what I've learned pre-COVID lessons about research. Now, it's very hard to see these, so it's a silly slide. But what I want to focus on is post-COVID, what I've learned. And the big thing for teachers, that what they need, I think, is open scheduling to design and make. And this is as they move beyond and they start to do face-to-face and they're in classrooms. I know that's happening here now, actually. I don't think it's happening right now in Canada. But where teachers need to encourage making digital and non-digital. So accessing that lockdown behavior of young people, actually making analog drawings, poetry, as well as digital. Critical framing of the facts that they get on the web, obviously. So questioning false, fake news, okay? Looking at algorithmic notions of Google, actually playing with what the digital teaches us. Mixed media work, and then more kind of quiet work. I think one of the things we're finding is that all this online time makes us all feel a little quite drained and tired. And getting off it and doing craft-centered work is something that some teachers have done. And then, as I said, inquiry-based work. And just really, I mean, good teaching is good teaching. So going back to what you love and trying to adapt that into an online space. And that's it. I'm done.
Jennifer, thank you. I was making notes as you were talking there. I don't know if you can get your camera back on there for a second, but I think we've got a minute or two that I think I could speak to you for a couple hours here, just on that sort of 15-minute overview of what you gave there. You know, when you talk about sparking joy, I think most educators at this particular point would go, wow, that's really hard to do, you know, but then, and I know you talked about the participatory literacies, which I find fascinating. But there really seemed to be a sense in what you're saying of giving kids sort of other opportunities they didn't have. When you look at everything that you've done over the last year, is there one particular thing that sort of stands out? Like if I'm tired and I really feel like I haven't done a great job this year with what I'm doing, just because there's been so much, and, you know, my kids are coming and going. In your year here, is there one thing you would point to where I should start with? Like I took away storytelling. Yeah, I mean, that was always one of my strengths, teaching was storytelling, but I could see you forgetting that when you're online. Is there one that you see there that would be something you could pass on to all of us?
That's a great question, Lionel. I mean, one of the things that has worked really well, I'm doing a study with children in the year 4 classroom online, and they share their favorite things. So I've written previously about artifacts, and they've shared like their favorite, let's say, well, often let's say teddy or some sort of funny thing that their family member gave them. Or so with children, it's actually sharing part of their home spaces, because they spend so much time there. Yeah. And they don't necessarily want confronting questions all the time. So Lionel, what did you think of you know, this book that we read? Or Lionel, what do you think about this math problem? Because it gets to be too much focus on the student online, and it can be a little bit intimidating putting your mic on and talking and everything. Yeah. So there's something about actually uploading and sharing photos by students, and I've done that with these year 4 students. I've done this with undergrads. I've done this with doctoral students. They love to take photos of their desks, right? Of all the funny little quirky things we have on our desks. So I would say there's that. And also don't hesitate to have a little bit of quiet time where we all write, have a task, and you can see everybody, but it doesn't always have to be talk. Anyway, those would be my two
Well, it just seems like that opens it. All of a sudden, you've made that connection. And I know when we were doing webinars last summer, that was the biggest worry people had was, how do I build a relationship with my students if we're online? And both of those, that's the first thing kind of got that, oh, that's cool. That'd be kind of fun to do. I know we're really short of time, but I need to ask one more. And I know you didn't talk a lot about this, so this probably isn't a fair question to put you on the spot. But the whole area of assessment, is when we're online, like even those things that you talked about, they're probably formative in some way, but is kind of assessment this year, just the way things are so crazy, we just kind of have to maybe give ourselves some permission to let a few things go? Or is it like, no, it's important we still make sure that we collect evidence on students' work?
Well, I think that's the big debate, right? Over here that they threw out the standardized tests and now they've reintroduced them. And one of their epiphanies is that when they first did some initial summative testing, it was a bit devastating because of the learning loss. Yeah. But actually what they found was that the second round was a lot better. And the second round was a lot better because a lot of the students had forgotten about test taking stuff. So that's a little taste of the newest stuff on assessment, but we're going to find out so much post-pandemic.
Yeah.
I'm not an assessment person, so I can't say otherwise. I just know it's been incredibly hard for children, adolescents, and teenagers right now in terms of mental health.
Yeah.
That adding a standardized exam to that, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. So, no, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
And on behalf of everyone here, Jennifer, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know it's in the evening for you on your continent. And
for Mary, I would do anything. She knows that. I'm very happy to do it. And I'll just be here in the background listening to Mary and Terry.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Great.
Yeah. Bye.
Okay, well, now it's my pleasure to introduce our second speaker for our session today, Dr. Terry Ann Campbell. She is professor in the Schulich School of Education at Nipissing University. This is not her first time with us, so it's great to have you back, Terry, and we're really glad you're able to take the time to join us. For those of you that weren't with us in the previous session, and those of you that know her, you'll know she is a storyteller and an elementary teacher before joining the Department of Teacher Education at Nipissing. And her work centers on theory and practice of reading, writing, and talk. Terry has traveled and published widely, presenting workshops and papers on her chief area of interest and expertise. Classroom practices that effectively support students as engaged literacy learners. Again, a very topical area in this last year of COVID and various different learning and teaching contexts. So Terry, it's great to have you back, and I'll pass the virtual mic over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Lionel, and thank you, Jennifer. That was a wonderful talk. Some of the things I'm going to talk about piggyback beautifully on some of the things you've said. So I think this is going to be a really interesting webinar for everyone. So I'm happy to be back here. Hello, everyone. And I'm going to talk again from the textbook Literacy Out Loud, which I co-wrote with Michelle McMartin, who is a local elementary teacher, now working on her PhD, actually. And Michelle and I worked for 10 years over mostly literacy. And I found that more and more it was the role of talk in the classroom that we became interested in. And that's where the book Literacy Out Loud was born. Then now we have the challenge of going online, and Michelle actually was online part of the time with her students, and then she was back at face-to-face. In the fall, I was online with my students, and I had a course that was totally designed to be in person, a lot of experiential things, going outdoors, all of that sort of thing. And of course, the one piece of magic that I always really, really loved is the daily read aloud. And I know that's the case for many, many elementary teachers. So I thought a lot about, okay, how can I make that stay alive online? How can I sustain the magic? with the read aloud. So I'm going to share some, just some experiences with you. A lot of the ideas and strategies and the books that I'm going to share, you probably already know, but these are the ones that over the past year, especially the past fall, these are the ones that have stood out for me and for other teachers as well. So I'm just arguing that the virtual classroom can still be literacy out loud. There can still be lots of talk. We can still do those daily read alouds, and we maybe can adapt them in different ways. And yeah, how does it work online? I'm going to share some teacher suggestions, and I want to read something that Michelle, the co-author, she just sent me this message last night. She said, it's all about building community. So Jennifer just said that. It's all about building community through vibrant read alouds, give the students something to talk about. Rich conversations happen in the breakout rooms on Google. She uses Google Classroom. I just bounce from group to group. So that's one way of sustaining the magic. And I'm going to talk about book selection too. All right, so we'll go to the next slide here. Yeah, so the activities and the strategies mostly come from Chapter 5 of Literacy Out Loud. That chapter was called Optimizing the Impact of Read Alouds. And most of these strategies are completely adaptable for online learning. And I just want you to notice what Dana, one of Michelle's students, is what Dana said about read alouds. A story read out loud can take you on a reading ride, going up and then going back down, or it could have a flip. You never know quite what's coming next. And that's the magic of the read aloud, right? So how can we maintain that magic? Well, we can use live recordings, you know, where you just present to your students as you would as if you were in front of your students and read and talk to them with the actual book. Or you can look for really good recordings. And that in itself is a really good critical process, finding really good recordings. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then it's the book selection too. And so what I'm going to do today is mention some books that were particularly successful in the online environment and why. So it's top quality videos, top quality books that you need to find. And then the final piece is teaching kids how to create their own read aloud recordings. And I got that idea from Michelle. She's done quite a bit of work with that with her students. Okay, so let's take a peek here. So yes, using well-selected picture books, that's where you have to start, right? And find a user-friendly app. There are lots of them. Jennifer mentioned some, an app or a program where with read alouds, where the illustrations themselves can be front and center. And one that we've worked with that's very successful is Book Creator. They have a library of videos that are already produced, but you can also use Book Creator to create your own. And it's quite easy to use. Michelle's students basically taught themselves, and you end up with a fairly professional product. So I'm highly recommending Book Creator. And then use texts where the illustrations are vibrant and tell most of the story. So when you're online, you want to take full advantage of the visual aspect. You see, unlike in the classroom, when you've got the children maybe sitting on the carpet or on chairs and you're up at the front, and sometimes the book is small and they can't always see the illustrations. Well, that problem is taken care of when you're online. You can really get a good look at those beautiful illustrations. And then, of course, you're looking for texts that spark lively conversations and activities. All right, so here are some of the samples. I could have chosen way more than these, but these are the ones that in the last while I have found work really well online. They just sing. The actual read aloud is great, but they also spark lots of talk and lots of activities. And of course, you in the UK will know Henry Finch. I am Henry Finch. Wonderful, wonderful book, fabulous illustrations, and just great storytelling with all kinds of possibilities for artwork after, and lots to talk about too. And then a newer one, A Stone Sat Still. It's a quieter book by Brendan Wenzel. You may know his They All Saw a Cat. This is a beautiful book with just gorgeous, gorgeous illustrations. So that's one that can be shown very slowly online and lots of time to stop and discuss. There isn't very much print, but there's lots going on in the illustrations. So that's I Am Henry Finch and A Stone Sat Still. And then other books where the visuals are really vibrant. You want to get into some nonfiction books too. If You Find a Rock. This is one that is appealing to all ages. It's full of beautiful photographs and then little poetic passages about the different kinds of rocks that there are. And of course, all kinds of outdoor activities. You could send the kids out later to collect rocks and do their own writing. And then for some fun, I Want My Hat Back by John Clausen, who happens to be a Canadian. His illustrations are so droll. This is a very, very funny book, but full of opportunities for good talk afterwards because there's a morally ambiguous ending. I'll just say that much. But this one works really, really well online because of the simple illustrations. He also wrote, you may be familiar with This Is Not My Hat, which was a Caldecott winner. And this one's more for younger children. And then there's the old chestnut Frederick. Frederick is a classic for many good reasons, and Frederick works extremely well online. It's just the illustrations are simple and beautiful. There's lots to talk about. There's artwork you can do. Yeah, all kinds of possibilities there. And yes, so looking for really high quality recordings. Of course, you're going to want to be doing your own read alouds. I'm sure you do. But finding high quality recordings, there is so much out there on YouTube that is not high quality. And I think teaching kids how to decide what makes a good read aloud video and what doesn't would be a really, really valuable thing to do with your children. But it's also very time consuming for you as teachers. So I'm just going to give you some tips. The program Storyline Online has performers and celebrities doing read alouds, and some of them are animated, some of them they're just showing the story and telling them with their beautiful voices. One example is Sophie's Masterpiece, which is a beautiful book by Eileen Spinelli, and the reader is CCH Pounder, and she does a gorgeous job. That's a I would highly recommend that one. The other one, A Bad Case of Stripes by David Shannon. This is a fun book. If you know David Shannon, you know his work is fun and funny, and his illustrations are brilliant. And I'd like to show a little bit of Sean Astin reading from A Bad Case of Stripes. So if Lionel can put that on for me, we'll just show you 2 minutes of that.
Hello and welcome to the Screen Actors Guild Foundation Book Pals. My name is Sean Astin, and I played Sam in Lord of the Rings. I love to read, especially to kids. I have a daughter whose name is Allie, and she loves it when I read to her. And we both love lima beans. The story I'm going to read to you is called A Bad Case of Stripes, written and illustrated by David Shannon. Allie loves this book. I hope you do too. Camilla Cream loved lima beans, but she never ate them. All of her friends hated lima beans, and she wanted to fit in. Camilla was always worried about what other people thought of her. Today, she was fretting even more than usual. It was the first day of school, and she couldn't decide what to wear. There were so many people to impress. She tried on 42 outfits, but none seemed quite right. She put on a pretty red dress and looked in the mirror. And then she screamed. Her mother ran into the room, and she screamed too. "Oh, my heavens," she cried. "You're completely covered with stripes." This was certainly true. Camilla was striped from head to toe. She looked like a rainbow. Mrs. Cream felt Camilla's forehead. "Do you feel all right?" she asked. "I feel fine," Camilla answered. "But just look at me." "You get back in bed this instant," her mother ordered. "You're not going to school today." Camilla was relieved. She didn't want to miss the first day of school, but she was afraid of what the other kids might say. And she had no idea what to wear with those crazy stripes. That afternoon, Dr. Bumble came to examine Camilla. "Most extraordinary," he exclaimed. "I've never seen anything like it. Are you having any coughing, sneezing, runny nose, aches, pains, chills, hot flashes, dizziness, drowsiness, shortness of breath, or uncontrollable twitching?" "No," Camilla told him. "I feel fine." "Well then," Dr. Bumble said, turning to Mrs. Cream, "I don't see any reason why she shouldn't go to school tomorrow. Here's some
Okay, we'll stop there. In the classroom, that would actually be a great place to stop, wouldn't it? Because then you could ask the audience, well, what are some of the possibilities? What might happen next? And the book is full of unexpected things that happen when she does go to school, as you can imagine. A very fun book, lots to discuss, and lots of activities that could follow on that. And also note the way Sean Astin introduced the book, some really good tips on doing book introductions. He had a concrete object, the lima beans. He introduced himself personally, and then just launched into the story with all the voices, of course. All right, so more. The other source for really good live, or really good source for recordings would be author websites. This book by Danielle Daniel, Sometimes I Feel Like a Fox. Danielle is from Sudbury, which is about an hour and a half from here. And she's a First Nations woman. And she wrote this book. I'm just going to read the dedication. It tells you why she wrote it. "This is dedicated to Owen. You will always be my little deer, D-E-E-R. It is also dedicated to the thousands of Métis and Aboriginal children who grew up never knowing their totem animal." So in this book, Sometimes I Feel Like a Fox, she goes through the various animals, and each child says 4 lines about why they feel like that animal. So it teaches about totem animals. And her video, I'm not going to play it, there isn't time, but you can look it up. Her video also explains about totem animals and how to find your totem animal. Children love this book, and even the adult teacher candidates loved this book. So here's one example. "Sometimes I feel like a butterfly, delicate and free. I spread my wings wide open and flutter from flower to leaf." And each page is just like that. It's an animal and just 4 lines. The other one, this one, Big Red Lollipop, I got from a local teacher, Laurie Corbett. She teaches a grade 1 too. So those of you in the UK, that would be 6 and 7-year-olds. And there's the author, and she has a video of herself telling the story, just doing oral storytelling without the text, because the story is from her own childhood. And she tells the story in such an animated way, and she has the kids doing little actions and joining in on chants. It's very interactive. And Laurie Corbett, the teacher, said that her students just love this story so much. They want to play it over and over again, and they join in with the actions. And she said there's just all kinds of activities that could follow that one too, art activities, more storytelling, and so on. So those are 2 good ones where the author is the storyteller. So those are good sources. Okay, so next steps after you do all these exciting read alouds. How to adapt some of the strategies. There are a lot of strategies that are mentioned that you probably already know, but how do you adapt them online? Well, you could use the chat sidebar, and I did this with teacher candidates for ongoing responses right during a read aloud. Not appropriate for all texts. You don't always want an interruption, but it does work for some. And then hold grand conversations with the whole group immediately after the read aloud. And those are, of course, open-ended, student-led discussions. And that I like doing that because there's always an immediate response, often an emotional response right at the end of the story. And then Jennifer mentioned this too, allowing time away from the screen. Okay, everybody go away now and go and do a drawing, do a quick draw or a sketch to stretch. Do some quick writes, and then come back, take photos of your work, and then share it either in small groups or with the whole group. So that's a really, really simple adaptation that works very well. And I'll wrap things up here soon. Then that step that I teased you about at the very beginning, having the students create their own read aloud productions. A book creator is a really good one for this. I know Michelle has a lot of experience with her children creating some very high quality read alouds. They work on them and they present them to caregivers, parents, peers online. And added bonus, Michelle is able to use those creations for assessment. If they use Book Creator right in the classroom, she can observe them and she notices that they're self-correcting and so on. But it's the pride in being able to present their own book through Book Creator. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And thanks, Lionel. I see you popped back up here.
Thank you, Terry. That was great. Thanks. It's interesting. There was a question in the chat while about halfway through, and there was also a bit of a reply to it as well. But the question was around, and I think it's the previous slide that starts to talk to this. But Stavrula makes a really good comment that I've heard from many educators that. The kids they're doing their own thing. They don't want to turn on their mics, and you don't know what's going on the other side. I think the comment you made is most of the times they're playing games or they're doing their own writing. And so it's that engagement piece. And because they're at a distance, you don't have that connection. Do you find that the read alouds start to get past that? Because if I'm just going to go back a slide there, if you don't mind, it seems like after the read aloud, all of a sudden you have these strategies where they're on, right? It's not like they can sit back and play Fortnite on the side kind of thing. Is that a fair statement? Or?
Yeah, I and this is one of the reasons I wanted to talk about read alouds, because I whether in person or online, I found and whatever age group, I find read alouds really do engage. And it's like you said about the storytelling. The story pulls them in, the visuals pull them in. And then if they know ahead of time that they're going to be engaging in either an activity or a discussion right after, they just stay. And for some reason, yeah, I know other activities, they do want to drift off, but with a really engaging read aloud, and that's why I stressed also selecting the right books. Yeah, if the book is the right book, you're going to have engagement. Yeah. And that was true for the adult learners and for kids. That's the key, right? If it's a good story, we're just there. We're absolutely there. Yeah. I don't know if you can speak. You made a comment earlier about Michelle. I think it was one of her quotes about having breakout rooms. This still works, like if you're not in that breakout room, having this sort of activity, and maybe you have a group of kids working there, that still keeps them focused. So you don't have to have eyes on everything like in the classroom where you can kind of look across and see everyone, right? Yeah. And you just pop from room to room and they don't know when you're going to pop in. That's great. Good. Well, Terry, thank you very much. For folks, as I know a few have said thank you in the chat, I forgot to mention that there is also Pembroke is offering through an offer of 20% off various books put together by our presenters today, and I'll throw Jennifer's up right near the end as well. But you can go to Eurospan Bookstore and receive 20% off your purchase of Literacy Out Loud, which Terry's been talking about here for the last few minutes, just by clicking on the button there, and it'll take you there for that offer as well. Just remember the code for all the offers today is Pembroke20. So Terry, thank you very much on behalf of everyone. It was great to have you back again, and look forward to next time, because I think you said this was chapter 5, and there's many more chapters in the book for us to explore. So looking forward to it. So thank you very much. Folks, we'll move on to our third presenter for our session today. And it's my pleasure to welcome back Larry Swartz, a literacy and drama instructor at OISE at the University of Toronto. For those of you that have heard Larry speak, been in Larry's classroom, even just heard his name passed, you'll know that he is passionate around literacy in a whole range of areas.
He's worked in classrooms as a consultant and a workshop presenter. He's been involved with teachers throughout North America, with groups of teachers in China, New Zealand, and the one that I always like is Queen Noor's Literacy Initiative in Jordan. So he takes his passion for books worldwide. And as many of you know, there is a handout at the end with all his recommendations, and we'll make sure you get that, because that is something people are always asking for after as well. So Larry, it's great to have you back, and I'll pass the virtual mic over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much, Terry. Book Talk always excites Uncle Larry, and I loved hearing your book choices. And you took me back to my classroom. I had an activity called the Picture Book Contest, and The Bad Case of Stripes was right up there as their favorite picture book for humor books. And so thanks for those titles. And I'm going to be looking at Teaching Tough Topics, which is the title of my book and my framework for my literacy instruction these days and my literacy writing these days. My day, how was your day today? Well, my day was, I finished off in the morning here in Canada with 2 Zoom classes. I teach a course in literacy, and today was our last day. It's a 2-year program, and this course is called Issues in Literacy. And I finalized that course today at about 2 o'clock. And this afternoon, as soon as I finish chatting with you, I have a course that I teach called Inclusive Education. And so this is sort of the meat and the sandwich for my day, and it sort of represents my world. And tough topics, you're going to get a few more book talk, and but I want to frame it around what is a tough topic, why tough topics, and I will give you a book talk as well, quick book talk with some slides and a book list as well. So the title of my book, Teaching Tough Topics, We Live in a Challenging World. You really needed to come to a webinar to hear that. But there's so many issues going on in our world today. And in terms of literacy, we talked a lovely chat about online teaching versus face-to-face teaching. But what is the place of children's literature, which has always framed my, my work, whether it's arts-based teaching, with my book Drama Themes, and of course with Kathy Lundy, I wrote a book called Creating Caring Classrooms, where we talked about community. But this one addresses the need. We need to respect differences, and we have to respect different points of view than our own. Why more so today? Always so in Creating Caring Classrooms, we wanted to talk about community, we talked about collaboration, we talked about communication, we talked about compassion, and the 5th chapter is about confronting the bully issue. It's about being compassionate of others. Certainly in the last, well, always we've needed to do that when I was a classroom teacher, working with my students in the grade 3-4 classroom, but more so today because many of my students that I'm working with now, of course, social justice, diversity, and equity is a framework for their understanding. And so we have to find a place of belonging. And it's challenging. Finding a place of belonging, it's challenging in life, folks. So it's challenging in the classroom. We have our mandated curriculum. And so, of course, we teach science and social studies and writing and spelling and physical education and hopefully drama. But how do we bring the world into our classroom? How do we bring the issues and what's happening into the world in the classroom? So when I watched CNN this morning at 6 a.m., how do I bring the horror, what's happening in the world, the racism issues that come up in a community? How do I bring that into our classroom? And how do I take my classroom to the whole world? So we need to gain information, so that we talked about inquiry today, gather some resources, and then we have to introduce some strategies that deepen understanding of social justice, diversity, and equity. The subtitle of my book is How Do I Use Children's Literature to Build a Deeper Understanding of Social Justice, Equity, and Diversity? Yes, I have that by heart, but I wanted to get the terminology. But for me, it's as simple as start with a book. So whichever book you're going to choose, Let that be the impetus. Let that be the springboard, the motivation. Let that be lead to inquiry and understanding so we can unpack those issues. And whether we're looking at the students on screen or whether we're sitting around in a circle, how can we build our understanding and how can we build our connections? The book is centered on 10 topics, and I'm going to read a list to you. And when you listen to this list, think about which ones intrigued you. Race and diverse cultures, the immigrant and refugee experience, indigenous identities, the Holocaust, physical and mental challenges, poverty, death, loss, and remembrance, gender identity and homophobia, bullying, and chapter 10 is called Ripples of Kindness. So that list, I might have gone through it quickly, and they're not new terms, but they're tough topics. And what makes them tough? Teachers are nervous of not having the right language or might not having the right answers. Well, let's start that inquiry alongside our students. Which one of these interests you? Which one have you implemented? And which would you feel you would like to learn more about? Let's just think about that. Race and diverse cultures, immigrant and refugee experience, indigenous identities, the Holocaust, physical and mental challenges, poverty, death, loss, and remembrance, gender identity and homophobia, bullying, and ripples of kindness. Which ones have you taught? Which ones do you feel comfortable teaching? And which do you feel tough teaching? And why are they tough for you? A little background information. Chapter 10 is Ripples of Kindness. I had a dynamic editor who helped me with this book. She passed away just upon the completion of this book. And we had a discussion about chapter 10, Ripples of Kindness, because I wanted to give hope in the end. I wanted to give courage and I wanted to give some understanding. She says, but Larry, that's not a tough topic. And I said, is there anything tougher than teaching kindness to kids? So we had a discussion, and that became chapter 10. Ripples of Kindness comes, the title comes from Each Kindness by Jacqueline Woodson. So why use children's literature? First of all, it helps children make connections. We invite students to reveal their stories. I've always argued that the stories are swimming in their heads, but how do we have children choose to reveal those stories? Some stories might be uncomfortable for them. In a turn and talk situation, do they talk or do they just listen? We want these stories to help students make connections. We want to raise questions about topics of concern. And those questions can lead to inquiry that we learn together, because I don't have the answers. I can tell you some of the topics that are challenging for me, which I feel they're all challenging for me, but which one do I need to learn more about? Let's start with a book. What questions come to mind? What information do we learn? And the important thing is we want to learn about the identity of others. When I share a few titles with you, they're open to learning about the cultures and the identities of others, the stories of others. But why do we want to do that? So we can reflect on our own identities. Children's literature allows us to do them. And these stories are narratives. They are case studies for what's happening in the world, for relationships, for values and struggles that are happening in the world. Let these books bring the world into our classroom through the narratives and case studies. And my friend Jennifer uses the word artifact. So literature serves as artifacts for meaningful response. And those responses include writing, talk, media, and the arts. So my book is designed on giving a response repertoire. And next, in a couple of weeks, I have a new book out called Better Reading Now. Sorry for the plug, but that was my way of looking at the different response modes using literature. Basically, I'm just going to give a little overview just so you have a context. So in each chapter, I tell you about a personal journey that I had and why I chose these topics. Then I had the gift of having expert voices. I turned to some colleagues, some authors who gave me their expert voice on such issues as death, loss, and remembrance. Catherine Patterson, I was able to get and acquire a beautiful interview that she gave about dealing with loss that drew from her profound book, Bridge to Terabithia. I start with the language and vocabulary. Do kids even know what race means and racism means and diversity. Opening up the topic as a minds-on activity. So if I want to talk about the Holocaust, if I want to talk about the poverty, I have a minds-on activity that invites uncovering and inspection. And in each chapter, there's 2 literature sources for different grade levels. You decide, and of course, I pay attention to picture books, novels, poems, newspaper articles, a script, and visuals, illustration. So those become the centers for uncovering the theme, and those are response strategies that give you some taste of ways to look inside and outside the text with the students. And my favorite thing, each chapter ends with great books for a tough topic. So these are up-to-date book lists that help teachers choose and use books that might be available to them. Oh, I'm going to start. This is my favorite thing. Lana, let's do a little book talk here. My slideshow. Here we go. Teaching tough topics. So I prepared a little slideshow, just the book covers, and I'm going to do a quick walk through some books that are drawn from the tough topics. Next. This is not necessarily, well, I think spelling and vocabulary is a tough topic. I do have a book called Word by Word that became an interest of mine, looking at vocabulary and spelling. This is a great gift for teachers because in this book, the boy loves collecting words. Peter H. Reynolds, How Can You Go Wrong? Even looking at the cover, I got so many lessons that I could do with students, having them collect words. Let's look at the commonalities of the words. So this book tough topic of looking at spelling, but it's not a social justice per se. Next. I love this book. Every one of my students did a little task with this. If you come to Earth, this book invites readers on page 1. Dear alien creature, if you come to Earth, here are some things you must know. So the writing activity is perspective writing. I want to do a little research on this project next year. If you come to Earth, here's what you should know about my community, about my bedroom, about trees, about dogs, about books, about the internet. So each of my students had to write a fictitious letter and give some information. It'd be interesting, and many students did choose this. How would you explain the COVID-19 to an alien creature? So that leads to drama. I love this book, If You Come to Earth, because the topics can be varied. That's by Sophie Blackall. Next. The Proudest Blue, a Canadian title, Ibtihaj Muhammad. Let's just look at the cover, a story of hijab and family. And one of my students just told me that she used it with her practicum placement, and she said she had such a rich discussion with the students. So it's some kids are really going to connect to this by saying, hey, that's my life. Others are going to learn about the lives of others in The Proudest Blue and the story of hijab. There's an example of a book that I used in Diversity and Cultures. Next. Out. I was responsible for writing an article about the migrant and refugee experience. Actually, there's many, many titles. And this one I'm kind of was at the top of my list, and I've used it with kids 10 to 12 years old. And it's about a girl and her mother who leave a country. They leave their homeland, but their father stays behind. And if you can see the image there of a black and white illustrations on a boat, but the 2 characters are in color. And so how do they adapt to their new home? The girl fits in quite beautifully, but more than anything, she wants to see her father. So this is a story about immigration, a story about the refugee experience with simple text. Great discussion with that one. Next. Morris Micklewhite, without exaggeration, I think I've shared this with 1,000 teachers when I did some workshops around the province on creating caring classrooms. I love Morris Micklewhite, a Canadian title by Christine Baldacchino. Morris wants to wear an orange dress. Why? It reminds him of the sun. It reminds him of tigers. It reminds him of the color of his mother's hair. So he has no problems playing in the dress-up center wearing the tangerine dress. And of course, he gets teased. His mother His mother paints his fingernails pink. Now, why would a mother paint her son's fingernails pink, knowing that he'll get in trouble? So the kids tease him, but Morris Micklethwait overcomes them. He does stay at home. He says it doesn't bother me, but then he shares his story with his mom. Does she even know what's going on in school? And spoiler alert, the girl, Becky, a little tough little rascal, says, "You can't wear that dress. Boys don't wear dresses." And brave Morris says, the last line of the book, "This boy does." A book about bullying, a book about gender equity, a book about belonging. I love Morris Micklethwait and the Tangerine Dress. Next. Always With You. This is a story about death, loss, and remembrance. My friend Eric Walters wrote this picture book. And on the page 1, a girl receives a letter. Her grandfather had passed away. And he writes messages to her, "Always with you." So we can ask stories about death, loss, and remembrance. And I'm going to tell you a little story. When I was writing my book, I went into a grade 4 class. And I went into the classroom and I told stories. I began with my own story that I shared with my colleague David Booth, who was my mentor, and he passed away. So I told the students that story. And I said, "What stories do you have about people who have always been dear to you, but maybe they moved away, or maybe they passed on?" And of course, kids tell stories about their goldfish. They tell stories about their dogs and their grandma. And one boy sitting in the corner, this was the 4th grade, sort of 10 years old, put up his hand. And the story that he told was, "Last week, my brother committed suicide, and we're going to have a celebration of his life." Well, that made me gasp. I'm a guest in the classroom. The kids in the class knew the story and in the community, but he felt comfortable enough to share the story, which he came one-on-one to share with me. So it's the stories that are inside their head, and we need to deal with these stories. Again, my editor said, "But Larry, how is death part of equity and social justice?" I says, "Is there anything more equitable? We live and we die. We all live and we all die. Let's look at the different cultures and bring understanding to that." Always With You inspired some stories. And this girl, throughout her life, she gets letters left by her grandpa when she goes to high school, when she goes to university, when she gets married. And he says, "I'll always be with you." So I asked the question, who is always with you? Next. Those Shoes. This book has been popular with teachers who want to look at poverty. My colleague at the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario did a huge initiative with looking at poverty in education. And this book is very popular for uncovering that, and it's the one that I used with the grade 3 class to what is poverty. And this boy, he wants those shoes because everybody has those shoes. His grandmother says want and need are 2 different things, but she wants her grandson to belong. I love this book, Those Shoes. Next. The Promise. My colleague Margie Wolf from A Second Story Press wrote this story based on her mother and aunt's experience in Auschwitz. So when do we begin talking about the Holocaust with students? This picture book brings some information, the amazing visuals. I'm very fond of the illustrations, but the strong personal narrative in The Promise, where 2 sisters made a promise to each other. And that's the book that I chose, and Margie gave me permission to use one of the illustrations in teaching tough topics. Next. The Other Side. This is the one before my students went out. Oh, I can't tell you the number of calls I got. Larry, have you got a book for Black History Month? Because that's when their teaching began, whether they were online or face-to-face. Well, why don't we do Black history at all times of the year? But how could I not turn to Jacqueline Woodson or the novels of Jason Reynolds? And this one I actually showed a video because there's some variations of this online. And so I didn't read it aloud to them. We watched a video and then we did a response to The Other Side, where a girl on a black girl on a swing is looking at a white girl on a fence. Why is the fence there? Will the girls ever unite? Why are they segregated? What do their parents think about that? And what does the other side mean? What does it mean on the other side? So this opens up their eyes to differences, and certainly is one book that starts talking about Black Lives Matter and a sense of belonging. how can I not celebrate Jacqueline Woodson? This cover illustration is from its 10th anniversary edition. Next. Stolen Words, an Indigenous, again, a second story title by Melanie Florence. What I liked about this book, this is about a girl, and she wants to learn about her grandfather's past. So she asks the questions from her Indigenous perspective about why were your words taken from you in residential school. A beautiful book that starts raising some questions because the questions come from the girl and her warm relationship with her grandfather. Next. We Are Water Protectors. This book came on my desk when I was in my office last summer, I was in my office last summer and the book is delivered. And I said, this book is going to win the Best Book of the Year award. It won the Caldecott Prize. It's the first time Indigenous illustrator has won the Caldecott Best Picture book. And even looking at the images there, it's about Indigenous culture, it's about nature, and it's about water protection. And my students responded terrifically to this, and several used them in their practicum experience and wrote teacher guides for We Are Water Protectors. I can't say enough about this book. I'm glad it did win the award. Next. I Didn't Stand Up is the one that I chose for looking at the bully issue. Again, Lucy Falcone, this is Canadian, and there's different kinds of bullying in this. There are different kinds of hate in this book, and it's about the bystander role, and how does a bystander become an upstander? So that boy was teased because of his skin color. I saw it, but I didn't stand up. So this is a book that starts looking at certainly the empowering of doing something and taking action. Next. A World Full of Mindness, a friend, my publishing friend, they wrote a book about kindness from Pajama Press. Each of the authors and illustrators did a page on kindness. Well, the new book is about mindfulness. And so authors and illustrators celebrate using your senses and finding your calm, which many teachers bring that instruction into their classroom. And I did a book list of books that talk about mindfulness as well. This is a gem of a book to help you think about that calmness in our lives. Next. All Are Welcome. There's the title. There's a title that talks about community, talks about diversity. We are all welcome. Just let's look at the cover page here. And incidentally, those who buy the picture book, the cover becomes a poster. So many teachers throughout North America have this cover on their classroom door. But look at the cultures there. There's a girl in a hijab. Let me see. A blue hijab, text-to-text connection there. And so we look at diversity there in a community. What is my place in this community and how I can invite others? And so I don't have to say any more about this book because the title does it all. Next. Outside In. Many books that are written now. This book was written, I'm not sure when she did her draft, but it was published early in 2020. Outside In. It's about a girl who's stuck inside. And she's looking out in nature, and she appreciates the world outside because she's stuck inside. Did Deborah Underwood write this book for the pandemic? I don't think so. I'll have to do a little bit more research. But this is a world that many kids are experiencing. And so there are many titles these days that are, and you're going to see lots of literature that brings the pandemic experience. My colleague, my friend, Eric Walters wrote a novel in April 2019. He published that novel in 6 weeks. It went online and then it went in paperback in September. And it's called Don't Stand So Close to Me. Because Eric is a genius at looking at issues. And this takes the kids right into the world of the pandemic. So you're going to see novels that deal with it. And obviously, at the moment, I'm talking about picture books, but Don't Stand to Me, you'll see on my list, Eric Walters. So let's look at the book to bring some comfort and understanding of the worlds that the kids are encountering today. I think I have a couple of more. Next. Oh, I love this book. Oh, I love this book. I Talk Like a River, Canadian. Sidney Smith is a great Canadian illustrator, and his books have won awards. I think this is his best illustrated. I admire your other, Sidney, but this is about a boy who was, I use this book in physical and mental challenges. This is a boy who's troubled by his stuttering, and he talks like a river. So his father tries to comfort him and encourage him and praise him. And it's a beautiful book, which is a unique kind of difference as well. I want to give this book to President Biden because he experienced stuttering. I want to give this book to Anderson Cooper, who said that was part of his past as well. So get me in touch with them, but I can put it in touch with kids. I Talk Like a River. Beautiful, beautiful book. Next. And The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. I have given this book. I think I've given it to Jennifer as a gift. I think I've given it to Mary Machusi as a gift. It's just a beautiful book by Charles Mackesy. And it talks about kindness. What do you want to be when you grow up? I'm going to get goosebumps. He asked the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the answer is kind. What a beautiful answer. So this is for adults and children. I found this book. It was the Waterstones Book of the Year when I went to the visit England a few years ago. I guess it was the winter before last. And I came back to Canada, and it was Heather's book in the Indigo. And I think I've given that book to all my friends as a gift. The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. Lots of things, a lot of comfort, and lots of inquiry in that beautiful book. I think that finishes it off. There's my website. I do have a website, larryswartz.ca, and once a month I publish titles. I'm just going to publish tomorrow picture book titles of new picture books that I got. But it's a free website. Dr. Larry recommends, and you can get some website titles there. See, if we talk about books, we'll be here till 9 o'clock. But while I was talking to my students today, a couple of hours ago, knock on my door, Amazon delivery, look at this book. It's called My Very Favorite Book in the Whole Wide World by Malcolm Mitchell. My very favorite book in the whole wide world. How would you answer that question? What is your favorite book in the whole wide world? And Jennifer would have students fill in the blank. What is your favorite place in the whole, what is your favorite picture in the whole wide world? So this is a new book, again, an Afro-American central character written by a football hero. So I'm Malcolm Mitchell. And this is based on it because this boy, his homework assignment is to bring in your favorite book in the whole wide world. Well, this book is about a boy who doesn't like reading, doesn't want to read. He doesn't care about books. And for his homework, he goes to the library and he goes to the bookstore. I don't have a favorite book because he is one of those boys and girls who just is reluctant reader. So how do we empower those kids? How do we honor those kids? And of course, it's based on the author's story when he was a young kid where he didn't like books. And now he's an ambassador for reading in his program. So that's a new book that I want to share with teachers, my very favorite book. And so just to finish off then, when in June, in May and June, at any time, when all the Black Lives Matter protests were happening in the world, I asked myself as a teacher or as an educator, as a person, how can I bring that understanding into our classrooms? I talked about bringing the world in our classrooms. So when I talked to workshop, one teacher said to me, true story, I don't have any Black kids. Why do I have to teach this in my classroom? So I think it's about all are welcome here. How do we help kids understand that all their cultures, all their gender differences, their age difference, their socioeconomic differences? So I think, and I have since collected, and I've got a separate book list, if you go on my website, of books about Black Lives Matter. And I'm staring at a pile here of YA literature that deals with that. So literature, and there are many books The publishing industry has done our job for us by bringing these books of all kinds of cultures and identities. In the opening essay, I looked at some expert voices about multicultural literacy, where we think that just looking at diversity, but multiculturalism is about sexuality, is about poverty and social class. We have to broaden our definition. And I think it's our job where we bring in books where kids can help find themselves and we can lead them to find others. So the book that I just got here, look at this. Have I ever told you that Black Lives Matter? This celebrates 160 Black heroes that kids can start researching about Black Lives Matter. And I didn't get to talk about novels other than my friend Eric's, but this for me is the book of the year. It's called Ground Zero by Alan Gratz. He wrote the book called Refugee, told from the point of 3 different refugees, a boy from Syria, a girl from Cuba, and a boy who's escaped. So 3 escaping the Holocaust, 3 different time periods. So Refugees is on every teacher has to read that if you've got 10 to 12 years old. And I don't even sell the book because it came popular. Lo and behold, Ground Zero by Alan Gratz takes us to September 11, 2001, where a boy is in the Twin Towers with his father because his father works there. So it's really gripping because it's really real. And what do our kids know about life 20 years ago? Because in September this year, we're going to honor that 20 years of that event. What's brilliant about this book, talk about alternate voices. So we meet September 11th, 2001, alternating chapters. We are in Afghanistan in 2019. Where a girl is trying to work with her community, and how has the world changed, and in terms of a belonging. Oh dear, I could talk till 9 o'clock about books, but I have to stop. So please look at my website. I look at, you're welcome to look at my book list. And I think we've come full circle in talking about Jennifer and how we bring those to students digitally, and certainly Terry, who talks about making those books come alive. Thank you for listening to Larry.
Larry, thank you very much. I do have to bring in one question here, though, because I recognize a few names that are of folks on our session today, and I know some of them are teacher candidates or occasional teachers. And Terry brings up a really good question, and I know it was the theme of everything you're talking about here. But when you're a teacher candidate, when you're a substitute or teacher on call or an occasional teacher, there is this issue of there's someone watching. And so how do you encourage your teacher candidates to take on these topics when, man, I should just do the safe thing, get a good review and, move on and get a job, and then I'll do it then. So is there anything you say to your teacher candidates?
Absolutely. Well, that was part of the teaching tough topic. Why is it stressful? So I'm afraid of it. So I'm nervous about teaching so many teachers said they wouldn't teach Morris Micklethwait in the Catholic schools because it brings up some issues that they don't want to be confronted with. My message as a teacher, and we're going to end this webinar in a moment, is when you close that door, you make decisions about who you want to do. The stories go home. Students will take their stories home. I'm not going to get into censorship at this hour, but when we talk about those issues, so when we do talk about homophobia, when we do talk about poverty, and certainly race and culture, but if in our classrooms can't be safe places, then where are we bringing it in? I absolutely respect the voice of the parents, respect their cultures, respect their religious, but my invitation to my students, and they are aware of that. They know that is their obligation. So start with what you feel comfortable with, and start with a book. One thing that protects us, it's called the curriculum, because the curriculum invites us to look at social justice, diversity, and equity. The challenging the curriculum was, of course, the phys ed dealing with sexuality. That was one of our most challenging documents. But any curriculum in any province, state, or country, they're going to support us. And how can we not say, that will give us our support and strength. So start with what you feel comfortable with. That's why I read out the 10 topics. And that's my advice to my student teachers. And they know that, not just from me, but we have anti-discrimination courses, and they have had many sessions on things that are happening in the world. So there's my 4 o'clock answer to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And on behalf of everyone, Larry, thank you again. I love listening to your book recommendations. And, I recognize a few from a mother-in-law who was a kindergarten teacher and shared them with my boys when they were younger. And there's many more in there. So thank you so much for taking the time today for sharing your thoughts with us on teaching tough topics. And for those of you still with us, thanks so much for joining us today. I put in our third offer for Jennifer's book. And again, don't forget the user code Pembroke20, and at Eurospan Bookstore, that'll get you that discount when you enter that in there. Please know our next session is Let's Get Writing on Thursday, April 8th. We look forward to seeing you there with Laurie Jameson Roche. And we'll look for more information on that session as we get closer. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you soon. Take care.